Hello, Dons fans. It's Ian Hume here from the Don the Stat podcast, and thanks for joining us tonight on this most prestigious of occasions. It is October 2nd, and no, we are not talking about the Crichton Medal. We are talking about the second edition of the Don the Stat Jack Kirby Medal. Joining me tonight is my co-host Jonathan Walsh. Jono, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been together podcasting. How have you been?
Good, thank you, mate. Yeah, you can tell it's been, well, I can tell it's been a couple of weeks because we got off to a pretty rough start there with a few retakes of the intro. But yeah, good. It's been a pretty quiet time lately to be an Essendon fan, hasn't it, mate? No news. Media's not talking about us. Yeah, obviously not fortunate enough to be playing finals. Um, but yeah, no, otherwise going well and looking forward to yeah, just bringing up some of the good memories of season 2025 because whilst it was a tough year on field, it wasn't all bad, was it?
No, absolutely. And we'll be going through each game tonight and looking at, so we're reflecting back on the games. Some of these are 4 or 5 months ago, and but just sort of thinking back about what the good came out of it and what the negatives came out of some of these games, and sort of putting a full stop on the year before we sort of head into Essendon's finals period, which is the trade and draft period, as we know. And it does sound like we're going to be a decent player this year, given everything that's happening. But tonight's not the night to be discussing that. Tonight's the night to be celebrating the year that Essendon had, as much as you can celebrate a year where you finished bottom four, but also to celebrate the legacy of the man that we chose to be the face of the Donnerstadt Best and Fairest award, and that is Jack Kirby. Jono, can you just give us a bit of information on who Jack Kirby was?
Yeah, certainly. Well, it was a bit of a fitting one for us because we obviously wanted to name it after someone that was kind of going to sum up what we're about, and we did a little bit of research and discovered that Jack Kirby is the player who's credited as being the first, at least first known player in VFL AFL history to kick a goal with their very first kick. And we had a few additions to the Jack Kirby club this year, didn't we? Which was pretty cool. But yeah, he played 77 games for Essendon in the early part of the 1900s, so 1911 to 1915, and then obviously had a break due to wartime and came back in 1918. He kicked 113 goals in those games. And yeah, it was the leading goal kicker in our 1912 Premiership side, kicking 43 goals, and was also our leading goal kicker in 1913 as well. Played in our 1911 Grand Final and Premiership side as well. And then, yeah, runner up in 1914 and third in 1915 in terms of the leading goal kicker as well. So, yeah, a pretty prestigious talent and ability to hit the scoreboard as a small forward.
Yeah, indeed. And the Jack Kirby Medal, unlike the Crichton Medal, it has a fairly simple voting structure. So both yourself, Jono, and I will have a 3-2-1 on performances in each game. And then we ask our Patreon subscribers to do the same. And then we collate the Patreon votes and get an overall 3-2-1 from the patrons. So in total, a player can receive a maximum of 9 votes per game. It's been a really good addition to the Donnerstadt community over on Patreon these past couple of seasons. It just gives, it's great to see what everyone else valued in games, and there's sometimes we all sort of come to the same conclusion, and other times we have widely different voting structures. So it is always interesting to see how that pans out. And I want to say a big thank you to every Patreon who participated. We had votes received from over 50 individuals across the course of the season. So thanks everyone who has participated in the Jack Kirby Medal voting each year, and looking forward to keep building on that next year. Shall we get on to the voting, Jono, and start with back in round one?
Yeah, let's do it. It was a week later than we anticipated, wasn't it, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. At the Hawthorn at the MCG with the opening round washout. It was a game where Essendon sort of fell behind early, and then, for much of probably everything after the first quarter, we were right in the game, but we just couldn't, catch up on that lead that we gave the Hawks, and they ultimately ran out 26-point winters, and Essendon 12-13-85 to Hawthorn 17-911, with Dersma, Langford, and Merritt kicking 2 goals each, as well as a number of one goals. And the best, as you see here, this comes from the AFL account of the game. They had Caldwell, Merritt, Durham, Dersma, and Martin. Jono, what's your memories of this round one game?
Yeah, you're right. We did let Hawthorn get away to an early start, didn't we? I think they kicked. Or Kako, I think, might have kicked the first goal of the game, and then they kicked the next sort of five or six to get out to the best part of 30 points at quarter time, and then after that we sort of drew level with them. Also, we really challenged them in that third quarter, but we sort of similar story to the last couple of years. We couldn't really hit the scoreboard. I think we had five or six scoring shots in a row at one point, but only kicked the one goal, and then the Hawks got two late ones. So we had an opportunity to get the game back to close to level pegging. Sort of halfway through that third, and unfortunately, yeah, the Hawks kicked away, and then yeah, we came again in the last, but yeah, the damage fundamentally was done in that first quarter, and the Hawks were too slick for us.
Yeah, absolutely. On to the votes there. And firstly, Johnny, you had Jai Caldwell with your 3 votes, Xavier Durson with 2, and Archie Perkins with 1. I was similar in terms of my 3 and 2 votes with Caldwell and Dursma, while I had Zach Merritt with the 1 vote. The patrons agreed with me with 3 votes coming for Jai Caldwell, 2 votes for Xavier Dursma, and 1 vote for Zach Merritt. Should we move on to round 2, Johnny?
Let's do it. Yeah, not a particularly memorable game for the team, but a little bit memorable for Tom Edwards, who debuted. Like Isaac Kako did the week before, he also joined the Jack Kirby club and kicked a goal with his first kick in senior footy. A high-scoring game, but ultimately one that we lost out to the Crows by 61 points at the G. Edwards kicking 3 on debut was probably the highlight for me, mate. But any highlights for yourself?
I think the first couple of rounds just with Zach Merritt, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about Zach in the last couple of weeks, but just sort of reflecting back to that early season form. I know we were getting beaten, but I think he kicked 6 goals in the first two weeks, and I was thinking that even though the results weren't going away, maybe we finally got that probably the thing that was missing from Zach's game for the longest time was that. Regular goal kicking that you see from the absolute best mids in the competition, and early in the season, I thought, "Oh, here we go." He might have actually discovered that, but that part of his game sort of fell away as the season progressed. The other takeout from this game that I discovered going back through the archives was this 100 point score that we put up here was our highest score for the year. And barring the COVID shortened games in 2020, I think it was back in Dick Reynolds' first season in 1933 that we had a year where we had a lower, higher score for the year. So it sort of says a bit about our troubles scoring. That a game we lost by 61 points ended up being our highest score for the year.
Yeah, no, that's pretty damning, mate. Should we get on to the votes?
Yep, take it away.
Yeah, so I gave 3 to Zach Merritt. 36 disposals and 4 goals was hard to ignore. Elijah Sardis, I think that was a game he broke his hand, didn't he, in the warm up, and ended up playing and probably played the best game of his short career thus far. And now that I see his name here, I also remember the groan of the crowd when Sam Draper lined up sideways for a set shot for the first time and put it through. So I gave him the 1 vote. He kicked 3 that day. Pretty similar from yourself, mate. Merritt 3, Sardis 2, and Isaac Kako for his first vote. And the patrons went with same way I did. Zach 3, Sardis 2, and Sam Draper the 1.
That's right. On to round 3, which ended up being our first win of the season, and a bit of a bogey side Port Adelaide, a team that we were. It was sort of. I think it was. We went into that game having lost 8 or so in a row against them, and for a time there, it did sort of feel like it was going to be 9 in a row, if I'm recalling correctly. But we managed to claw it back, even though we weren't very accurate with our scoring. We ended up winning that game 9-18-72 to Port's 8-12-60. Goals, Caddy and Draper both kicked 2, and then Menzies, Robertson, Martin and Rendon all kick singles, whilst Merritt, Shield, Draper, Durham, and Martin all kick 1. It was an important game for the Bombers. He obviously, in hindsight, looking back at, we didn't end up doing much with it, but it was really important to get that first win on the board, especially after that last week against Adelaide, where we were really, hit hard in the media, and fairly so, given how we defended in that game. And it was pleasing to see us bounce back there. What are your memories of this game, Jono?
Yeah, we had some injuries at this stage of the season. It obviously went on to become a lot more. But round 3 was our third debutant for the season with Sardar Hooley. debuting, and he came on as the sub, didn't he? And just really brought a different dynamic to the team and lit us up. Those couple of long searching runs from half back through the middle of the ground really did change the dynamic of the game, and we finished really, really strongly. I think we kicked 4 goals to 1 in that last quarter to go on and win the game, and as you said, get our first win for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that really stood out from this game was it was probably the first time this year that we probably saw what Zach Reed was projected to and why everyone was so high on him. I think Georgiades, I think, had 4 scoring shots in the opening quarter, and he cycled through Mackay and then Ridley and looked to be unstoppable. And then Zach Reed went back on him and I think sort of played him in sort of like a meter or two in front and completely shut him out of the game there. So there was a lot of questions about Zach's game in the first couple of weeks as he's sort of going into the season, and I think there were people already writing him off. But this was the first game where you went, okay, this is what Zach Reed could be, and we obviously saw over the next few games him really gain confidence in himself, his body, and that expressed itself in the way in which he played the game. And you talked about Sato Hooley there. It was really exciting to see that run when he came on the ground. And unfortunately, we didn't really see it from him in the remainder of his appearances for the season. So hopefully that's something that the coaches are going to be able to unlock as they take him into next year.
Yeah, spot on. Let's have a look at the votes, mate.
Yeah. So you gave Jay Gresham 3 votes. I think that was a game, real hot and cold year from Gresham. Some games he was sensational, or some halves of games he was really sensational, particularly when he was sort of playing that high half forward role and pushing up and assisting in and around the clearances. He had some really good games in that role, and he had some other games where shockers and selfish shots on goal. So a real up and down game from Jade. This was the game after we ended the Dylan Shield at halfback experiment, and he went back into the midfield and did quite well in that role. You gave him 2 votes, and then 1 vote to Mason Redmond. I had completely different votes for the first time this year. I gave 3 votes to Sam Durham, 2 votes to Xavier Dersma, and 1 vote to Zach Merritt. And then the patrons had Dersma as their 3 votes, 2 to Jade Gresham, and 1 to Zach Merritt. On to round 4. Oops, sorry, round 5. Sorry, with the bye. I forgot about the early season bye. But this was our gather round game. Jono, give us a rundown on what happened in this game.
Yeah, we got off to a pretty hot start in this game, didn't we? We were out by about 6 goals at half time before we let the D's get back into the game. I think they kicked 4 or 5 in a row in that third quarter to really peg the game back to sort of a goal or two. But I think what was most pleasing about this one was we did run the game out really well, and rather than sort of just getting I guess an honourable win for lack of a better term, we did hit the scoreboard late and kick the last 3 goals of the match, the last 2 of them in sort of red time or junk time. Particularly memorable, I guess, for Jai Menzies kicking 4 and showing the player that he could be. Unfortunately, as we all know now, he has been delisted, but he's been picked up to be a leader in Tassie's VFL team next year, and I'm sure he'll give himself a chance to get on an AFL list beyond that. But it was a really pleasing win, and I think we also did the first thoughts live from the Adelaide Oval, yourself and James Lowry after 5 or 6 Cooper Pale Ales jumped on and entertained the listeners.
Yeah, I do remember this game being there live. It was a great experience, much better than my previous gather round experience when we had that awful game against Port Adelaide, but it was much better defeating Melbourne the way we did, and that was probably it was probably our best win of the season. Certainly our largest win of the season, and I know the D's weren't performing very well. They ultimately didn't go on to perform very well, but it was probably the one moment in the season where you sort of thought, okay, maybe if we continue with this sort of form, we potentially could do some damage, and a lot of that came from what we saw from Sam Draper in this game, and obviously this was when Nick Bryan went down with his knee injury, and that was quite horrific to see him go down when he was probably for the first time cemented as a best 22 player, particularly because we wanted to play the 2 rucks. But then Sam really stood up as that number 1 ruckman against the best ruckman in the comp in Max Gawn. Max Gawn still had an influence, but I thought Sam Draper was superb in this game. Maybe he's not named in the best. I just remember him really standing out there.
Yeah, spot on. Let's get on with the votes on that one, mate.
Yeah, let's do it. And so, Jono, you had 3 votes to Zach Merritt, 2 votes for Jai Menzies with his 4 goals, and 1 vote for Sam Durham. I gave 3 to Dylan Shield, another really good performance in the midfield, 2 to Jai Menzies, and then 1 for Archie Perkins. The patrons had 3 votes for Zach Merritt, 2 votes for Sam Draper, and 1 vote for Sam Durham. On to round 6 over in Perth. And yeah, a bit of an up and down game against the eventual bottom of the table West Coast Eagles. Give us a rundown of what happened in that game, Jono.
Yeah, it wasn't a particularly pretty game at all, was it, mate? We actually we had to come from behind another game where we conceded early goals, but Peter Wright was back into the side following the injury the week before to Nick Bryan, and yeah, welcome return to the side. He kicked 6 goals and then went on from there to have a really good season, and didn't necessarily ever hit the heights of his best and fairest year, but he certainly played probably some of the most consistent footy he's played across his career. But yeah, look, a dour win that was ultimately marred by the injury, Achilles injury to Sam Draper, and yeah, scores were level at 3/4 time, and we fought out a pretty tough and grueling 2-point victory in the end.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess it's an interesting conundrum because we've sort of up until a game we're going to get to later in the season. The last 3 years we haven't lost to these sides that are finishing in the bottom four. But what we've really struggled to do is actually put them away, and we sort of played down to their level. Even though ultimately we've generally ended up with the win in these situations, it hasn't been very pretty. Although I do think it got close mainly because Sam Draper went down. I remember when Draper went down, they actually sent Zach Reed into the ruck, and I think all Essendon fans were cringing with the idea that Zach was going to go into that contested situation and get injured again, which thankfully he did, and we ultimately held on there and didn't give West Coast their first win of the season. They would only go on to win one. But let's get on to the votes there, Jono, and who did you have for your votes there?
Yeah, I gave 3 votes to Peter Wright in a tough game or a close game for him to kick 6. I thought was the difference. Will Setterfield played a really good role in the midfield, and I gave 1 to Andy McGrath. And then yourself, Humi, pretty similar. You gave 3 to Peter Wright, 2 to Jai Menzies, and 1 to Will Setterfield. And then the listeners, so the patrons, gave 3 to Peter Wright, 2 to Andy McGrath, and 1 to Dylan Shield.
Yes, and so after the first 5 games, let's have a look at the leaderboard. In equal 7th place, we had Andrew McGrath and Sam Durham, who both have 5 votes. Equal 5th place, Dylan Shield and Elijah Sardis with 6 votes. Equal 3rd, Peter Wright and Jai Caldwell with 9 votes. Both of those only got those from one game. The impact that a really good game can have on your vote total in this format. In second place was Xavier Dersma with 11 votes. And in first place is Zach Merritt with 19 votes. So, look, no real surprises there with the top vote getter at this stage of the year. Dersma, again, started really well in regards to the year. And then there's a couple of players who you can probably guess are going to drop off as the year progressed from this leaderboard. Let's move on to the following round, which was Anzac Day at the MCG. Jono, give us a bit of a rundown on how we went that day.
Yeah, biggest home and away game of the season, isn't it? And one that all Dons fans, well, and Pies fans love and gets a huge audience every year. Another sort of similar story. We gave the Pies a bit of a head start, pegged them back, and were relatively competitive throughout the game. And it was really only late, wasn't it? I think the Pies kicked 4 or 5 goals. Towards it's sort of in red time to really blow it out to that ultimate, what was it, 41-point margin. Pretty even goal spread, Wright, Durham, and Caddy kicking 2 each. And yeah, we had a pretty consistent spread of good players as well. Zach was the star once again, but another really good performance from Zach Reed in this match as well, that I think he'd put a block together here that started to show the player that he's going to be for us going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the standouts for me with regards to this game, and obviously we struggled. I think one thing we showed this year, and it unfortunately came off the back of having really slow starts and whatever plans we had in place pre-game, not being able to match what the opposition was doing. We're often coming from behind in the first quarters, but we really generally showed a good ability to adapt, sort of after breaks and get back into games. But when you're coming from behind so much, that's a real challenge to get in. It's just another example of a game where the slow start was followed up by the ability to sort of reset the game and almost get it on our terms. I think you mentioned a couple others, but I think Andy McGrath again showed why he's in Bobby Hill's nightmares, and just shut him out of the game until he had to get moved off, or he got moved off onto someone else, and that's when Bobby Hill, I think, kicked 2 goals in a couple of minutes, and then Andy went back to him and shut him out of the game for the rest of the game. And I think, yeah, just, Caddy kicked 2 goals there, but I distinctly remember sort of in that last quarter when, we was particularly in the early part of it, when we were trying to come from behind it. It really felt like that was the first time that Nate was like, I'm gonna win this game for the Bombers, and obviously ultimately he did, and we ended up 41-point losers. But there was just there's probably a 5-10 minute patch where he was probably the most dangerous player on the ground with the way he was playing, and it just gave us a small glimpse of what I think we can expect from Nate as he sort of matures into his body and into his football career.
Yeah, it's a good shout. He kicked 2-3 in that game, didn't he? And really did threaten to break the game open. Had he's only early in his career, but a career high 19 disposals in that match. So for him to, didn't finish the way we would have liked, but for him to show that on the big stage, with 90 odd thousand fans, there was a really good sign of what's to come with Nate Caddy.
Absolutely. The votes, Jono?
Yeah, I gave 3 to Jordan Ridley. I gave 2 to the man we were just talking about, Nate Caddy, and 1 to Zach Reed. I think Zach starts to feature a little bit in my votes around this period. You gave 3 to Zach Reed, 2 to Caddy, and 1 to Sam Durham. And the patrons gave 3 to Zach Reed, 2 to Nate Caddy, and 1 to Archie Roberts. And isn't it nice to see a board there in a game that we were competitive against the team that went on to play in a preliminary final for most of the day. It really did only blow open in the last 5 or 6 minutes. And I do remember Craig McRae saying post match that we really challenged them, and we were a hard team to play against on that day, which was nice to hear. So to see so many young players on the vote board here on Anzac Day, I think is a really pleasing sign for us.
Yeah, absolutely. On to round 8 against North Melbourne at Marvel. I think it ended up being a 12th or 13th win against North Melbourne in a row. And it's one, the pessimist in me says that that's one match closer to finally losing to North Melbourne. But, until that day comes, we'll just enjoy continuing to beat up on them, although it wasn't so much of a beat up other than the first quarter. It was sort of a reverse of many of our games. We jumped out to a quick start. Was it 6 goals in the first quarter, I think?
Yep.
And then we just could not find a way to hit the scoreboard, and North sort of crept their way back. And I think it was the young player, Finbar Malay, I think was his name, who went over time and had a difficult shot on goal to sort of put them in front close to the end. But he went over time and then had to rush a kick, and we were able to get the ball back and then ultimately hold on. But yeah, again, we spoke about this in the West Coast game. Sort of uninspiring wins against bottom four sides, and it's become a bit too much of a habit for us over the past couple of seasons. We had Perkins kicking 3, Caddy 2, continuing his good form from the previous week, and then some of the usual suspects in the best there. Many memories of this game there, Jono?
Yeah, it was a hot start. We kicked 6-1 in the first quarter, and then obviously to finish 9-11 means that we kicked 3-10 from there on in, and made it hard for ourselves. We had a patch in the last quarter where we had, I think it was 5 scoring shots in a row and kicked 1-4. So we could have not necessarily blown the game open, but it was a game that really we should have won quite comfortably. I think from memory, though, I think Ridley got injured that day. We had a couple more injuries in the match, didn't we? Did Mackay go off and not come back on? And I think we might have finished the game from memory with maybe the 1 or 2 fit players on the bench. And so I think, yeah, to still fight it out and grind out a win was a reasonable effort, one that we certainly made a bit harder on ourselves through inaccuracy in the second half.
Yeah, indeed. Onto the votes there, and you gave 3 votes to the captain, Zach Merritt, 2 votes to Archie Perkins with his 3 goals, and then Zach Reed, as he sort of said, Ridley went down. Mackay had some injury, so he really held up the back line there. I had three to Zach Merritt, two to Peter Wright. Again, not as much for his scoreboard impact. I think what really pleased me about Peter this year was his work up and around the ground, and particularly in the ruck. There's not as many effective forwards who can go into the ruck as what Peter can do. It's a real asset that we have. And I think it does raise questions about how we structure the side going forward. But I think his ability in the ruck gives us something that we can that other teams don't have, and hopefully we can make use of that. And then one vote to Will Setterfield. The patrons also had Zach as the three votes, two votes for Perkins, and then one vote for Roberts, who's starting to show up in the votes. And we'll see, and I'm sure that's going to be a regular occurrence across the rest of the year. Moving on to round 9, Jono against the Swans, also at Marvel. How did this game play out?
Yeah, well, it played out as a win, which was pleasing, but and thankfully for us, this one of the rare occasions where we're on the positive side of goal kicking accuracy or inaccuracy, because as you can see, 11-5, 71, defeated 8-15, 63. Another really good game for Nate Caddy. He had I don't know, 4 or 5 games this year where he really threatened to break games open and kick a big bag, but for one reason or another wasn't quite able to put it together. He had three in this game. It was a debut game for Archer Day Wicks as well. He kicked a goal with his first kick. I was just having a quick look before, mate. There are 11 players this year, which is an enormous amount. There are only three in each of the two previous seasons, but 11 players kicked a goal with their first kick across the competition this year. Five of them were Essendon players. Archer Daywicks was the third of those. So and I think it was also the start of Nick Martin really putting together some form through the middle of the ground as well, and probably played his best or equal best game for the season. But what do you remember of it?
I remember really enjoying it because I hate the Swans and I love beating them. There's too many. I mean, any Essendon fan who's been around for the last probably 15 years can point to three or four or five or six or seven moments where we've just been absolutely robbed against the Swans for one reason or another. So whenever we get a win against them, I've got an extra big smile on my face. But you're right about Nick Martin. I think you're gonna, he hasn't featured in the votes up to this stage, which was a bit of a surprise for a lot of us, given how much expectation we have on Nick and what we think he's capable of. But over these next few weeks, I think you're going to see his name feature a lot at the top of the votes there. So let's get to those, Jono.
Yeah, I gave three to Nick Martin. I gave two to Andy McGrath, and I gave one to Zach Reed. Hume, you went with Nick as well for three, and swapped the two and one to Zach Reed, one to Andy McGrath, and the listeners. Same three players, different combination. Three Zach Reed, two to Andy McGrath, and one to Nick Martin.
That's right. On to round 10 against the Western Bulldogs at Marvel. I think, given the form, maybe not form over the last couple of weeks, I think a lot of us were expecting that we put up a bit of a fight this game against the Dogs, and we certainly did not. It started really bad, and it just got worse. Not the worst game I've ever seen against the Western Bulldogs at Marvel. I'm sure many of you can remember the game that I'm talking about that I don't really want to go into too much detail about again, but this was pretty close. And we're going to cover another 90-point loss against the Bulldogs later in the season, but I think this was the worst of them. Especially considering the difference in personnel between the two sides for the Bombers and just the way that we played, we were just completely smashed. It was a really frustrating day after a couple of really good weeks against a team that we've historically struggled against, and there's another team that we played twice this year that we've historically struggled against that we just couldn't overcome that. And but I guess more from the other side, it's this sort of typical Bulldogs performance, beat up on a lowly side and but struggle against the good sides, and there's a reason that they missed out on the finals this year.
Yeah, let's move straight into the votes on this one, mate. Let's not put anyone through having to reminisce about this game.
No, it was hard to find votes in such a shellacking, but you gave three votes to Nick Martin, who gained shining light on the day. Ben Mackay had a lot to do down there. It was probably the first game this year that he sort of felt like he was back into form. It was another one of those players that had really slow starts and looked like he hadn't picked up a football in a while. He did have preseason injuries, so I think you can sort of get an understanding there. And one vote for Zach Reed as well. I gave 3 votes to Xavier Dersma, 2 votes to Nick Martin, and then 1 vote to Ben Mackay. And then the patrons had Dersma with 3, Nick Martin with 2, and Mackay with 1. On to round 11, Dreamtime at the G. Jono, and a very special debut from the person in the picture there.
Yeah, it certainly was. We ran out winners at Dreamtime, 11:15:81 to 8:10:58. It was a great debut by Angus Clark. He kicked 3 goals for the game, got himself a Rising Star nomination as well. Nick Martin, again through the midfield, really was in a purple patch at this stage of the season. Peter Wright with 2 as well. Durham Caddy Guelphy Perkins with 1. And yeah, Nick Martin ended up winning the best on ground reward, and I'm not going to butcher the pronunciation of it, mate. So we'll move on to the votes.
I think it's the Yukon medal. I'm going to go with that. And, as long as it's not a certain recently retired um, Bulldogs Bulldog / Hawthorn player, I think I'm pretty good at pronouncing things. But you're right. Let's get on to the votes.
Yeah, so I agreed with the judges and gave 3 to Nick Martin, 2 to Zach Merritt, and 1 to Sam Durham. Humie, you had 3 to Sam, 2 to Nick Martin, and 1 to Angus Clark. And the patrons gave Nick Martin 3, Sam Durham 2, and 1 to Zach Merritt.
That's right. On to, unfortunately, that was our last win of the season. On to round 12 against Brisbane. We were starting to get, the injuries were starting to pile up. And as you can see from the picture, I think this was Zach Johnson's first game. But, probably of all the games he played against teams that finished in the top 8, this was probably the most impressive. It didn't start very well. We got, was a regular occurrence this season, we were blown out of the water early on. But as the game went on, we really, stuck to our guns and showed a fair bit against the side that ultimately was going to run out premiers. And, I think at the start, early in the fourth quarter, we ended up matching them in terms of the score. And ultimately, we spent all our petrol tickets catching back up. But we played some really exciting footy there. Obviously, Caddy had his moment, which, given what ended up being goal of the year, I think it was a bit rough not to end up in that space. But again, we saw a lot from him. Nick Martin again was superb, just running through that middle. Caldwell probably played one of the best quarters of footy I've seen in that third quarter. He was immense, sort of at the coalface in the contest. It was really our contest work that got us back into the game. And as we saw on grand final day, Brisbane's contest work was outstanding. It was one of the reasons why they were able to dominate Geelong there. So, for that brief moment in time, we ended up showing up the premiers for, basically for that third quarter, and it got us right back into it. So again, a lot of pleasing signs with that, but just couldn't maintain it for the whole game.
Yeah, I was up at the Gabba for this one, and it was 6 goals to 1 at quarter time, as you touched on, and you're not not too many teams are gonna overrun Brisbane with that head start. But yeah, the second half and that third quarter in particular was pretty scintillating footy. We really did just take the game on and got through the corridor, and Zach Johnson was a good example of someone who did that. And really in the end, it was just a couple of gimme goals that we gave them, some by poor mistakes. There was that one to Cam Rayner in the first quarter, where he exposed Laverde 1-on-1. There was the one where Day Wicks at half back really tried to take the game on and missed his kick and was punished for it. But it was a game that, the margins overall was probably closer than what it showed on the scoreboard, albeit we did have our accuracy boots on that night, and Brisbane not so much.
Yeah. On to the votes, and Jono, you gave 3 votes to Nick Martin, 2 votes to Peter Wright, and then 1 vote to Nate Caddy. I also had Nick Martin 3 votes. I had Jai 2 votes, mainly for his third quarter and just the impact that he had in that part of the game, and then Caddy with a solitary vote. And the patrons also had Nick Martin for the trifecta on the 3 votes, with Jai 2 and Nate Caddy with 1. On to round 13 against Carlton at the MCG, and this was the debut of Luan Lual, who I certainly had already delisted, probably 3 rounds into the season. This is an obvious one, but he came in and sort of showed me up, and I know he hasn't got a contract yet, but I still, if he manages to get it onto the list for next year. I think he's definitely earned it. But just as a game as a whole, Jono, how did it play out?
Yeah, well, not as well as we would have liked, was it? There's no team that I like to beat more, and we weren't quite able to get the job done that night, losing by 8 points. Peter Wright was really solid for us once again, kicking three, and Gresham played one of his better games, kicking two. Perkins, Martin, the Wild, Guelphy, Caldwell, and Dersma one each. But yeah, once again, and we've said it a fair bit through this patch, it was Nick Martin who really was the shining light for us. And I think at this stage we were starting to think, has he actually elevated himself to an A grade talent, and has he closed the gap on Zach Merritt as our best player? And yeah, I think we unfortunately robbed in the weeks to come of answering that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the first appearances of Parrish's name on the list tonight. Obviously, only played 3 games, and yeah, I think another one of those missing link players that we really struggled without for the year. So again, injuries is sort of the theme of this year at Essendon, and his was another one that really sort of set us back and not being able to get that midfield depth that you need to go up against the best sides. Onto the votes, Jono.
Yeah, I gave three to Nick Martin, two to Setterfield, and one to Peter Wright. Humi, you gave three to Nick as well, two to Xavier Dersma, and one to Setterfield. And the patrons had three for Nick Martin as well, two for Jai Caldwell, and one for Xavier Dersma.
On to the leaderboard after round 13. In sixth place, we had Peter Wright with 14 votes. Equal fourth place, Jai Caldwell and Zach Reid, 15 votes. You see, again, Zach Reid, one of those players who, after the first few rounds, really started to pick up speed. And unfortunately, I think that was his last game. Or the Brisbane was the Brisbane. No, it was the week before Brisbane was the last game. I think we sort of bypassed it. I think it was the Dreamtime game where I think both Zach and Ben went down. We ended up being really. That's when we really became struggle town behind the ball there, and again, we really playing catch up there for the rest of the season. Third place, Xavier Dersma on 20 votes. Second place, Zach Merritt on 31 votes. And going from 0 votes in the first 6 rounds to leading the count after round 13 on 40 votes was Nick Martin. As you say, it really was a purple patch. And it's the sort of footy he was playing that if he sent it over the whole year, you're right. We're talking about him in the conversation as being our best player. And, if you stretch that out for a whole year, he's probably an All-Australian player as well.
Yeah, no, you're right, and look, hopefully we get to see him a little bit earlier than 12 months from his injury date next year, and he can build on that. By all reports, his recovery is going really well, and yeah, if there's one thing that's keeping me excited about footy in 2026, it's that we'll get to see Nick Martin back on the footy field at some stage.
Yeah, absolutely. On to round 14 against Geelong at the MCG. Again, one of those bogey sides that we just seem to struggle against there. And we ended up losing that game 8-8-56 to Geelong's 23-13, 151. It was an interesting game after 3 quarters. I think we were down by 40 points at 3-quarter time. And with all the injuries, I think we were all sort of at that stage thinking we were doing okay against one of the best sides in the comp. And, it's probably just going to be an honourable loss. And then it just absolutely went to Cactus in the last quarter. I think they kicked at least 9 or 10 goals in that last quarter. Obviously got it out to a 95-point margin, and it looked really horrible. My distinct memory was a lot of those goals that the Cats were getting was because we were trying to be aggressive and go through the corridor in that last quarter. And we're just getting found out by a much better set up team. But I do remember being, I'm not happy that we lost by 95 points, but I felt like we were trying to play the right way. I think you compare it to, say, the Bulldogs lost from earlier. That was a game where we were trying to play safe and we were giving up the ball. It felt like against the Cats, we were trying to be aggressive and we were giving up the ball. I think if we are going to be a good side, we need to get that sort of aggression into it and start actually pulling it off. And we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the second Geelong game, but there are elements where we were being aggressive there that was actually coming off. So, the result wasn't great, but I thought the method that we were trying to play in this game, particularly in that last quarter, even when we were getting absolutely belted, I thought was the right path forward.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's sort of 100-point losses and 100-point losses, isn't there? And this one felt like it, at least we were trying to go about it in the right way, and we were completely undermanned against a team that ultimately went on to play in the grand final and were in really good form. But we were at pains to be able to stop them in any real meaningful way. But what we did have was an effort and an intent to continue to try and take the game on, and ultimately just got completely and utterly torched on turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. Onto the votes, and you gave 3 votes to Zach Johnson. I think you got close on 30 possessions in this game. I think this is the moment that you fell in love with Zach Johnson, and Nick Martin's got a bit of competition in your heart of hearts for your favourite Essendon player going into next year. Archie Roberts with 2 votes, and Peter Wright with 1 vote. I had 3 votes to Todd Goldstein. Obviously, we haven't spoken. This is the first time he's come up in the votes, but from Anzac Day onwards, when he had to come into the side, he was just a warrior. He often was beaten. He was often beaten around the ground just because he couldn't keep up. But he never dropped his head. He never gave in. He gave us a contest. We would see in games, when he didn't play, just how impactful he was. At the very least, nullifying the opposition ruckman, and he was superb. Will Setterfield with 2, and then Zach Johnson with 1 from me. And then the patrons ended up with Will Setterfield having 3 votes, Todd Goldstein 2, and then Zach Johnson 1. Uh, Last game before our second bye was against Fremantle at Optus Stadium. Jono, take us through this game.
Yeah, another debutant this day. Vigo Vicentini debuted in the ruck. A big ask for him, but yeah, 99.63, losing to Freo 16-8, 104. Luau and May both kicked 2 goals. We saw some signs here that Luau might be a handy player for us in the forward half. It sort of intercepted a couple of times to turn something or nothing into something. Caddy, Dersma, Gresham, Kako, and Wright with 1 each. But yeah, it was a game where another one like we saw on Anzac Day where Nate Caddy really did try and put the team on his back, unfortunately without success. What do you remember from this one, mate?
I remember I felt like we were more in this game for the first. It was one of those games where we were in it for 3 quarters, except that Fremantle were kicking unbelievably straight. I think it must have been close to even scoring shots at 3-quarter time, but the Dockers were kicking everything, and so we were falling behind. Even though for the most part, I felt like the game, in general play, the game was fairly even. You mentioned Caddy there, and it wasn't the goals he kicked this day. It was the way in which he delivered the ball into the forward. I think he had 2 or 3 of the best passes into the forward 50 that you would ever see. And again, just gives us a bit of an idea about his skill. You mentioned Vicentini. He's obviously raw and not ready yet. But just that moment, that tackle just before halftime, where he really threw his body at the Fremantle player, again, really says a lot about the type of player he is, and gives us some excitement for the future there as well. On to the votes there, Jono.
Yeah, I gave 3 to Jackson Pryor. I thought this was a real turnaround in his performances. He'd had a slow start and look at a pretty poor start to the year. Some moments that he'd like to take back, but I thought he was our best player on that night. I gave 2 to Nate Caddy and 1 to Zach Merritt. Hume, you gave 3 to Nate, 2 to Archie Roberts, and 1 to Vigo Vicentini, who was up against it against Luke Jackson, but his effort and endeavour was incredible. And the patrons gave 3 to Caddy, 2 to Roberts, and 1 to Jackson Pryor.
Yeah. After the bye, we faced Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium. This was a game. Again, was I think it was basically even for the first 3 quarters, and then we just fell away. I think again one of those situations where we just, because of the injuries and because of the inexperience in the side, we just didn't have the miles in the legs where players were able to compete for full games, and we ultimately got run over the top of by a team that is finished in the top 6. So obviously a really good side that we came up with really, one of the best, starting midfields in the competition there. Again, Caddy really stood out again with 3 goals. Archer May showed a bit with those sort of that burst of 3 goals. Probably didn't have after this game, it probably fell away a little bit. But again, probably the Fremantle game and then this game, sort of back to back, gives us a real good sense of what he could be. Particularly, I liked his work up the ground. Yeah, so given who we were up against, I thought our midfield acquitted themselves fairly well until we ultimately got run over the top. How did you see this game, Johnny?
Yeah, I think it was 3 points at three-quarter time, mate, and then they came out and just blew us away in that final quarter. I think we kicked one behind for the last quarter, and the Suns ran over the top of us. But yeah, if not for a little bit of better goal kicking in the second quarter, we might have been able to get into halftime with a sort of 3 or 4 goal lead and give us a little bit of comfort. But yeah, it wasn't to be. And another game where the opposition coach was quite complimentary about the way that we went about it. Post match, we were ultimately just undermanned and weren't able to run out 4 quarters.
Absolutely. Onto the votes. You had 3 votes for skipper Zach Merritt, 2 votes for Sam Durham, and 1 vote for Isaac Kako. And you know, we're going to start talking a bit more about Kako as the rest of these games play out. But for a first year player, he just kept getting better and better across the year, and we're going to see some games later where he had real impact, particularly up the ground. I had 3 votes to Zach Merritt, 2 to Durham, and 1 to Kako, just as you did. And the patrons had the same 3 votes and 2 votes, but 1 vote for Will Setterfield there. Onto round 18 against Richmond at the MCG, and some fairly low points of the year, but this might have been one of the worst. And I'm sure former Premiership hero Ted Fordham agrees with that assessment there. Jono, how did this game play out?
Yeah, nice work working that in. This game played out horribly, mate. It was probably the worst game of football I can recall being at 4 goals 13 to 6 goals 10. Yeah, let's move on from this one pretty quickly, I think, mate.
Yeah, who did you find votes for there, Jono?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was tough. I think I may have just pulled some names out of a hat and ended up with 3 for Archie Roberts, 2 for Zach Merritt, and 1 for Sam Durham. Humie, you went 3 to Roberts, 2 to Merritt, and Lockie Blackiston gets his first vote. And the patrons went the same as I did: 3 Roberts, 2 Merritt, and 1 to Durham.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this was the game where Martin went down, one of the most innocuous ACLs I've ever seen. I think this is also where Will Setterfield, who had a really strong sort of middle part of the year when he came into the side, also went down with that foot injury. And unfortunately for Will, that injury's come at a really bad time. Whereas I reckon if he played out the year in the same form that he demonstrated, he probably already has a contract for next year. And now he's really just got to wait to see how the trade and draft period plays out there. On to round 19 versus the Giants at Marvel Stadium. It's Essendon 7-14-56 lost to the Giants 16-8, 104. Was this McMahon's debut game or was he the week before? I can't quite. I think it was this week, wasn't it?
Yeah, testing my memory now, mate.
Yeah,
Good shout. Yes, this was his debut.
yeah, this was
Yeah.
his debut. Kicked 2 goals. Peter Wright kicked 2 goals. But yeah, not really in this game at any stage. Do you have any memories of this game, Jono?
Yeah, I think he was the fifth McMahon to join the first kick, first goal club for us this year. Luhrmann Luol in round 13 being the other one that we haven't mentioned. But no, look at another game really similar to some previous matches where we were sort of there or thereabouts, but didn't give ourselves the best opportunity to go on and win the game. When you're kicking 7-14, then yeah, you're not making the most of your opportunities.
Yeah, were we no goal 7 before McMahon kicked his first goal or something like that? We
Yeah,
kicked
that
ridiculous. We just had
that rings a bell.
yeah, it was just a ridiculous amount of points. I think the Giants, the other end, were just kicking everything. So yeah, it was just a real struggle game. There's some hype, for a back end of the season where I think we lost 13 in a row. There's some games you can talk about, some real positives. This wasn't one of them. But we did manage to find votes here. You had 3 votes for Jay Gresham, 2 votes for Jackson Pryor, and 1 vote for Xavier Dersma. I had 3 votes for Xavier Dersma, 2 votes for Jordan Ridley. That sort of patch in the back end of the year where he did come back in before the game ending. I think this might have been the game before he went out for the rest of the season. And then 1 vote for Jackson Pryor. And patrons had 3 votes for Dersma, 2 votes for Ridley, and 1 vote for McGrath. Onto the leaderboard from round 19. Fifth place is Archie Roberts, who's starting to make his move with 17 votes. Fourth place is Sam Durham with 20 votes. Third place is Xavier Durst with 27 votes. Second place is Nick Martin with 40 votes, and unfortunately, because of his injury, he's going to remain on 40 votes for the rest of the year. And Zach Merritt's taken back first place, currently on 47 votes. Down to the last 5 games of the season, onto round 20 versus the Western Bulldogs. A bit of deja vu this game, although I didn't. Again, another 90-point loss, but not as bad a 90-point loss, in my view. Although, yeah, much of a muchness, really. How did this game play out there, Johnny?
Yeah, I'm not sure there are good 90-point losses, but I guess there's varying degrees of bad, and perhaps this one wasn't quite as bad. But yeah, look, it was just I mean, the Western Bulldogs, if they proved anything in season 2025, it is that they are the ultimate flat track bullies. We were a pretty flat track this season. It's particularly by this stage of the year, given the list of unavailabilities that we had and the quality players that we had out, and yeah, they were just way too good. McMahon again made the most of his chances with a couple of goals there, and yeah, and that was about the only highlight of the game, I think.
Yeah, and I think the real low light was me in the preview saying that I felt like we could handle. I think Ridley was playing in this game, so I thought we had Norton covered, and I thought, maybe we could cover Sam Darcy. And I think between them, they kicked the first 4 or 5 goals of the game, and I just thought, oh no, this is going to be bad. I think what Norton kicked 7 and Darcy kicked 6 or something like that. It was something we just got absolutely mauled by their tall forwards, and I looked like an absolute fool. I don't know why anyone listens to me, but here we are. On to the votes there, Joe.
Yeah, I gave three to Sam, two to Archie Roberts, and one to Jackson Pryor. Humie, you gave the three to Dar, well, exactly the same, two to Roberts, one to Pryor as well. And patrons relatively similar with well, same with the three and the one, but two to Zach Merritt.
Yeah. On to round 21 versus the Swans at the SCG. A game we were in. I think the Swans probably should have won by more in this game. We sort of just hung around and hung around like a bad smell, and tested them a little bit, but ultimately the Swans ended up winning this game by 14 points. We had all individual goal kickers on this day, and yeah, I think it was the debut of Nguyen, and certainly showed his attitude. That step over of Papley is iconic, from the Vietnamese team of the century captain there in Jaden. Just trying to think what else stood out from this game. I think, yeah, it was an interesting game. I think we Blackerson there, as we say, we started to see him really over the course of the season really start to feel comfortable as an AFL footballer and as an AFL defender. Particularly the way in which he attacked the ball. I thought that was always really impressive. He was always hitting the ball at top speed. Once he got the ball, it was a little bit deer in the headlights at times, but he certainly showed there's enough there to work with, and that's why he's got a contract for next year.
Yeah, he started that game in the ruck, didn't he? And then rolled back. So we sort of threw something a little bit different at Brodie Grundy, who was probably at this stage of the year the most informed ruck in the competition. Not a pretty game by any stretch, but we did sort of fight it out pretty well. I think we got to kick the last couple of goals of the game. It might have even been the last three to really challenge the Swans, but ultimately they hung on for, yeah, what was that, a 2.5 goal or give or take win there. But again, not a game that's going to get brought up in the archives too often, I wouldn't have thought.
No, indeed. On to the votes. You had 3 votes for Sam Durham, 2 votes for Andy McGrath, and 1 vote for Archie Roberts. I had 3 for Durham as well, with McGrath and then Laverty, who played some really good footy in the back half of the year, undermanned or sort of undersized there, but really stood up. And I know he's it's already been confirmed that he's being picked up by the Giants as a delisted free agent. But I certainly don't hope fans boo Jaden. I can't really control that, but he's someone who gave his all for the club, and has gone on for a longer term security. You can't really blame him for that. And particularly in these last sort of 4 or 5 seasons as he's played as a defender. He's really stood up for Essendon there. And the patrons had 3 for Sam Durham, 2 for Andy McGrath, and 1 for Archie Roberts. On to round 22 versus Geelong down at GMHBA Stadium there. How did this game play out, Jono?
Yeah, not a place that we have a lot of good memories of going to, but this was a game where I think we won some fans and started to get some really good praise for the way that we were going about things. Another game where we were hideously undermanned. The Cats ran out, pretty comfortable winners in the end, 44 points, 10-5, 65 to 15, 19, 109. And the end of the game, the scoreboard probably flattered us a little bit because Jeremy Cameron was a chance to get 100 for the season, and they were playing through him, and he was trying to kick goals from everywhere. But McMahon once again made the most of his opportunities with 4 goals. That third quarter, we started to really change the way that we bought the ball inside 50. We were comfortable in sort of playing a bit of chaos footy and scrambling the ball in, getting it to ground, and then competing. And Chris Scott mentioned post game that it was as close to finals like footy that his team had experienced in quite some time, which once again was nice to hear from an opposition coach about how our young players were going about things.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point because it showed up a couple other times through the rest of the year. I think the next round against St Kilda was a good example as well, where we weren't trying to pull off the perfect pass inside forward 50. We're not a great forward 50 passing team, but we were just getting it in there into dangerous positions and seeing what we could do. And you're right in that, there was a real distinct difference between sort of the opening half and that third quarter. The opening half, we were just sort of bombing, and I think Geelong was on track to break the intercept mark record based on their opening half, and we really changed the way we played, created some chaos in that forward line, and really tested Geelong, and sort of maybe a little bit of a sign about how they could come under pressure. Geelong's not really a side you think of that, not being able to handle the pressure or things that are different. But ultimately we saw in the grand final that when the dam wall burst against them, that they were really found out there. Obviously, we weren't at that level, but there was that patch where they really seemed to have very little idea about how to handle it. So again, another little pleasing nugget in ultimately a poor season for the Bombers there. How would you see the votes in that game, Jono?
Yeah, I gave 3 to Mason Redman, 2 to Andy McGrath, and 1 to Liam McMahon. Himi, you went 3 to McGrath, 2 to Redman, and 1 to Archie Roberts. And the patrons went with 3 to Roberts, 2 to Redman, and 1 to McGrath.
Yeah, and we haven't really spoken about Redmond that much this year, and it's sort of this back end. And I think as we get into the next game as well, he sort of started to get that Redmond of old back there. On to round 23 versus the Saints at Marvel. Probably our best game in the back half of the year. We ultimately went down by 2 points and could have won with that Redmond kick just before the siren that just went wide of the goals. But a really pleasing performance against the Saints, with McMahon also showing up this week kicking 3 goals. You had Perkins and Langford kicking 2 as well. And it was one game that Zach Merritt missed this year, and Andy McGrath led. And I think given what we expect is going to happen, unless Zach's about to say something different at the Crichton that's happening right now, plays out, we could be looking at Andy McGrath captaincy next year. And I think there were some really good signs from him, particularly, him moving back into the midfield, after a few years where he's played solely as a backman. There was a difference to the way he was playing midfield this time around, compared to last time around, and it gives us another option heading into next year with how he played that game. And this is a game where again injuries really hurt us. I think Laverty was absolutely dominating the sort of first quarter and a half. The Saints couldn't get past him. He gets injured, and that allows the Saints to get back into the game. If he didn't have that injury, I suspect we win this game. But again, really pleasing signs. I think we came back again at the end when the Saints kicked a couple of goals clear. We came back and really fought it out, and ultimately just fell short. But considering how the rest of the year, it almost felt like a win leaving the game that day.
Yeah, it was the best pressure game I think that we've played in a long time in terms of sustained pressure throughout the a full match and full 4 quarters. We really took it up to the Saints. So look, they're not a powerhouse by any stretch, but given in that game we had Reece Unwin on debut, Jaden Ewan in game number 3, Lee McMahon in game 5, Sardar Hooley game 7, Blackiston game 9, Lual game 10, Clark game 12. Kako game 21 and Archie Roberts game 25. It's a pretty young and inexperienced team. So for them to be able to to take that up to the Saints like they did was again another one of those things that gives you a little bit of hope and positivity towards the future.
Absolutely. Onto the votes, and you had Mason Redman with 3 votes, 2 votes for Andy McGrath and 1 vote for Todd Goldstein. I flipped those first two with Andy McGrath and Mason Redman as my 3 and 2, and then Jackson Pryor as my 1 vote. And the patrons had McGrath as 3, Redman as 2, and Durham as 1. On to round 24 versus Carlton at the MCG. Jono, how did this game, our last game in Victoria, play out?
Yeah, not well. Losing to them once in a year is tough. Losing twice is almost unforgivable. Look, we cracked in, but ultimately a couple of the Blue Stars did put their hand up in the end and were probably the difference in the game. 8-8, 56 to 13-12, 90. Guelphy with 3. Kako really did try and win the game off his own boot in the last quarter, didn't he? And showed some pretty incredible sight. So it was pretty much a staple in the midfield by this stage now. And Langford with 1. But yeah, I think the Kako sort of last quarter is what I'll take away from this game, mate. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think for one of the most recent game that I went to, there's not a whole lot that I can recall. But you're right about Kako, and I mentioned it earlier, but his ability to build throughout the year. He was one of 2 players who debuted, or this was their first year, or the draftees this year, along with Murphy Reed, that played the entire season without being sub. And obviously Levi Ashcroft ended up winning a premiership medal and played in every game, but he was sub on a couple of occasions. So for him to do that in a team that was well beaten as a small forward most weeks was really pleasing there. And again, really good signs for the future. He's the sort of player, you know, I think when you hear small forward, you think, oh, they're going to sit at the foot of the goals and kick goals. And I think there's been a real shift in the AFL over the last sort of 5-10 years of these small forwards. You can't just be, or you can't carry maybe more than one of those players these days. These players have to get up the field and they have to contribute. They're really important for your ball movement, kicking inside 50, creating those pressure opportunities. And I'm seeing Isaac get up the ground, playing some centre bounce minutes and showing signs. You know, is gonna plug a hole for us, hopefully for the next 10 or 12 years, sort of in that role there.
Yeah, spot on, mate. Should we have a look at the votes?
Yep, all yours.
Yeah, so I gave 3 to Mason Redmond, 2 to Kako, and 1 to Angus Clark. I think Clark had a career high, short career so far. Disposals in that game. You had the same 3 and 2 as I did, mate, but 1 to Andy McGrath, and the patrons gave 3 to Redmond, 2 to Kako, and 1 to Angus Clark.
Yep, and coming back around, our opening round versus Gold Coast, and we sort of played it like our opening rounds of the season. It was a game where it really came down to how Gold Coast would react to the game, the pressure of having to win to make finals, and they were up to the challenge quite comfortably. I think the game was over at quarter time, and we just sort of went through the motions for the rest of the game, and ultimately ended our season with another 90-point loss. I think it was our 4th for the year. Not a great record to have. Jai Menzies in his last game as a bomber kicked 3 goals, and a few there with singles there, but yeah, not a whole lot to write home about in this last game of the season there, Jono.
No, it wasn't. I guess if there was one saving grace, it was that we did have a little bit of a dip towards the end, didn't we? They did ultimately run out and were far too strong, and they had a lot more to play for than we did. I think the big tick for us was just getting through the game, or hope was that we'd get through the game without injury. I think we ended up with Todd Goldstein getting the first concussion of his 350 give or take game career. I think the Guelphy go off injured with a calf as well, and I think Redmond might have been in that. Was it him with Goldstein? But yeah, there was sort of thankfully nothing too serious in terms of long-term injuries. But it sort of did typify the season in the end, wasn't it? Where we ended up having to run out the game a player short because we'd already made the sub and then had a concussion on top of that. But yeah, we sort of kicked a couple of late goals just to peg it back a little bit and show a little bit of resolve.
Yeah, you're right. You mentioned Todd there, and obviously he didn't get a contract from the Bombers, which I think was the right decision, and he seemingly hopes to play on. But if this ends up, he's someone given his career in the AFL deserves a proper send off, and if this was his last game he plays in the AFL, hopefully at next year's Essendon North Melbourne match, whenever that is, there's a big celebration of Todd. By both clubs. Obviously, has a much longer and storied career with the Kangaroos, but for someone who came in and sort of filled in for 2 years, he's been immense for us, and for 2 years he's been really popular. So hopefully both clubs can get together and do something about that. But the final votes for the year, you had Zach Merritt with 3 votes, Isaac Kako with 2, and Mason Redmond with 1. I had Dylan Shield with 3, and another player who played his last game for the Bombers ended up on 99, typical for Essendon. He got suspended for something that a lot of other players seem to do, paying attention to, for an action that a lot of other players did across the rest of the season that didn't get suspended for. As I think I said at the time, reminds me of Leo Jetta getting suspended for staging, and no one else since then that happening too. Seems to be a theme with Essendon players, and maybe that's just my bias showing. 2 for Kako and 1 for Roberts. The patrons had 3 for Merritt, 2 for Shield, and 1 for Kako, which means we've reached the end of our countdown. And going through the results, we'll start with 5th place. That ended up being Archie Roberts with 29 votes there. Came strong at the end of the year. How'd you see Archie's year, Jono?
Yeah, huge year of development for him, wasn't it? Just as we've been recording, obviously there's another award ceremony on at the moment, and I did see he won both the Rising Star Award and the Most Improved award. One bone to pick with the Essendon Football Club is that the Most Improved Award's not named after David Calthorpe, who's won it twice. And as he likes to say, how bad was he before he won it the first time? But yeah, like Isaac, he finished off the year stronger and than he started, and you often see young players fatigue as the year goes on. But for him to play every game and finish stronger than he started is a real positive sign. And to think that the benefit of this year is that Archie Roberts gets to start next year with 25, 26 games under his belt, and do another full pre-season. Yeah, it's really exciting for what the future might hold.
Absolutely. On to 4th place, and that was Andrew McGrath with 32 votes. He sort of came strong at the end as he took on more responsibility and sort of stepped up as a midfielder and then as a leader. How do you see Andy's year, Johnny?
Yeah, it's tough to get votes as a lockdown small defender in a 3-2 and 1 system. I suspect if we were doing 5-4-3-2-1, he probably would have picked up a lot more ones and twos early in the year, and maybe even that would have meant that he finished higher, because he probably was our most reliable and most consistent performer outside of Zach Merritt across the course of the year, just in a role for sort of more than half of it. That he's pretty unforgiving, but yeah, he finished really strongly, stepped up into the midfield when we really needed him, and we've mentioned this before, but I think the difference between Andy McGrath in his first stint in the midfield and what we saw this year was that he really started to take the game forward, and less of those sort of dump kicks around the corner, and more using his speed and agility to break clear and straighten up and get some meters gained. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he plays for us next year.
Yeah, indeed. On to 3rd place, and that was Sam Durham with 39 votes. Another step forward for Sam this year. Yeah, I think he's definitely a full-time midfielder now. I think like even last year was probably sort of half and half, and this year he's really stepped up in that role. Just you know, probably no outstanding game. It's hard to think of an outstanding Sam Durham game. He was always sort of involved there, and you would have patches of games where he would sort of disappear. But again, one of those players that we've really, again, considering where we've taken him from as a mid-season draft pick, really pleased with the output we're getting from Sam. How did you see Sam's year?
Yeah, much the same, mate. I think other than sort of a couple of games where he was hobbling around and we used him as a deep forward, he closed the gap between his best and his worst. So yeah, I think it was definitely a step forward. Maybe not some of the real highs that we saw in 2024 from him. But maybe that's also because we're starting to get a bit more used to seeing that from him now, and he's setting a higher bar for himself. But yeah, definitely a step forward, and I think if he can have more games now around that 25, 26 disposal mark, and potentially hit the scoreboard a little bit more too, with hopefully a bit of a deeper midfield, then yeah, I think I'd really be looking for him to close the gap on. Well, Zach, if he is still a Bombers player next year, but also Nick Martin in terms of who that conversation around who is our best footballer.
Indeed. Speaking of Nick Martin, he ends up in second place, 40 votes pretty much from about 5 games. So an absolute purple patch there in those 5 games. Started slow, then obviously had the injury there. But I think the football that he played in sort of that 5 week period, as we touched on earlier, it was of the absolute elite level. And yeah, his injury came at probably the worst time for him and for the club. But yeah, he's an absolute professional, and I expect that he'll come back as strong. He'll be the sort of player that'll be able to pick up, maybe not straight away from where he left off, but yeah, he'll leave no stone unturned to get back to the level that he was at prior to that injury.
Yeah, I think his best this year was the best of anybody that we saw this year. So, um, yeah, I think ultimately that second in coaches' votes for Essendon players, second in this award as well. I think it's that injury's probably cost him a Crichton medal this year, and and potentially some other honours around all Australian squads and things as well. His best football this year over that sort of 5 or 6 week patch was incredible, and I've got no doubt that he was on track to continue that through the remainder of the year, and can't wait to see him out there in 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, to very little surprise, I think the unbackable favourite for both this and the other medal that's happening tonight is the skipper Zach Merritt. End up with 55 votes for his back-to-back Kirby wins. I went back and looked at the results from last year, and he compiled 75 votes from last year. So it certainly wasn't as strong a year from Zach as we've ever seen. But obviously, he set such a high bar with his performance that he's always going to be drawing votes there, and still had a year that again probably those injuries could have seen a different winner. But yeah, Zach runs out as the Kirby Medal winner for 2025.
Yeah, worthy winner. I know there's a lot of things being said about Zach at the moment, but I think regardless of what happens from here, he's been a tremendous footballer for our football club over a long period of time. He's going to go on and well, he's won his second Kirby medal. He'll win his sixth Crichton medal tonight to go ahead of Hurd and sit behind only Dick Reynolds and Bill Hutchison, which puts him in the absolute top echelon of Essendon footballers across a really rich history. Unfortunately for Zach and for our fans and our club, it hasn't come with the on-field success that Hurd, Reynolds and Hutchison enjoyed. But regardless of what happens for him, my one hope is that for Zach's sake, but also our fans' sake, that if he does exit the football club, it's done with a level of professionalism and dignity, because it was getting pretty messy and nasty, and I think that's a sad thing for everybody. So, yeah, congratulations to Zach on this and also the Crichton medal, and yeah. It's been a real joy watching him play football for the Essendon Football Club, and if this is the last that we see of it, so be it. But yeah, he's given us a lot of great times and a lot of great memories. And I'm really grateful that we got to see him play in the red and black.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see there's the final top five there. But that takes us to the end of the Jack Kirby Medal for 2025. Thanks everyone for their support, whether that's as a listener, as someone who comments on our socials, or supports us as a patron. We appreciate all of you. It's been a great year for Don Lestad, even if it hasn't been a great year for the Bombers on field. He's hoping for a better 2026. Any final words from you as we sort of put the pin on season 2025 before we start projecting forward to next year, Jono?
Yeah, I guess thanks for putting this together, mate. Great to chat and catch up and talk through this. Thanks, as you said, once again to everyone who supported us this year, whether it's through leaving us reviews, sending us emails, sliding into DMs, commenting on socials, or being a Patreon supporter as well. It's yeah, that's been lots and lots of fun, and the great conversations still going on day in day out around the all things trade draft and everything else at the moment, and we're not done for Don the Stat content for 2025 either. I know you're team a catch up with Rick to talk draft and some prospects there. Rick Edwards is a great friend to both of ours, a big supporter of Don the Stat, but also been out to a lot of under 18 footy this year and has a real keen eye for young talent. So looking forward to listening to that. And you and I will pop our heads up a couple more times before the year's done to talk about yeah, sort of draft and trade and things as they happen as well. So yeah, we're not done yet, mate.
No, indeed. As you hear, listeners, a lot of exciting things to look out for until you hear from us next time. As always, stay safe and go Dons.